Thank you, guys. Yeah, I've written about the car ownership issue in Prague as well, and the declining trends are, I think, really positive. I think that's good, and I think the densifying and thickening the city will only help this condition. Henry Foy is going to moderate this panel. And Henry, are you in the house? Okay. Henry Foy is the Financial Times correspondent for Central and Eastern Europe. Henry's based in Warsaw, and he's been kind enough to come to Prague to discuss IPER's plan with them. And I think, Henry, we would hope that you can look at this from an economic perspective in the context of Europe. So, Henry, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, good morning. Thank you, Martin. Thanks for that fantastic presentation. Yeah, I'm based in Warsaw. I cover Central Europe from there. It's interesting, when I was asked to do this job about 2 years ago by my editor, I said to him, can I do it in Prague? Because this was a city that I'd been to, a city that I enjoyed living in, so it's visiting, and I could see myself living in. He said, sorry, you have to be based in Warsaw, because that's where business is based, and that's where more of the geopolitical clout, if you like, in this part of the world is based. I love Warsaw, I love living there, but sometimes when I visit Prague, I think what might have been. Before I was in Warsaw, I was in London, and before that I was in Bombay and then New Delhi. So without telling you which is which, I've seen the best and the worst of city planning during my short career as a journalist. Anyway, enough about me. We've got a fantastic panel here to talk about what you've just heard for about half an hour or so. So let's get them all on stage. First, Karl Weisbrod, who's the chairman of the City Planning Authority in New York. City Planning Commission, sorry. Omar Kolelat, who's the chairman of the Association of Developers here in Prague. Anywhere you'd like. Good to see you again. And finally, thank you. And Pavel Strablov, who's the senior project manager at Penta, also here in Prague. All right. Okay, we'll kick off. Karl, if you could talk a bit. I mean, you've got 35 years of experience in planning cities. How important is the plan? How important is the way in which a city thinks of itself growing?
Well, I think can you hear me?
There we go.
Yes. Okay. I think that obviously for any city, a plan is crucial if it's going to have any control over its own destiny, as opposed to simply letting things happen. And what I find intriguing about this plan is that it is taking into account what Prague is today and building on that, and has a set of values, many of which, if not all of which, I share, that create a basis for civic engagement and discussion. That said, I think the challenge for any city and any plan is how you move from an aspirational set of values and goals, and apply those to actually realize those goals. And I think that's the most difficult step in any plan, because it requires extremely strong and focused municipal leadership. It requires the investment community and the civic community to have a general consensus. And it requires taking those aspirational goals and establishing a strong, detailed set of initiatives to realize those goals with time frames and metrics that enable one to measure it along the way. And so that, I think, is probably the next step for Prague, and that will determine how successful ultimately this will be.
I mean, Omar, as a developer and someone who represents developers, how important is it that you guys know what's going on in terms of how you then go about your business?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, from a developer's perspective, one of the biggest difficulties we have in Prague is actually to actually get permits and go through the whole permitting process. Definitely very happy to see that there is a certain vision in terms which could potentially put certain, let's say, regulations. For us, regulation is, or clarity of the rules is definitely something that we do welcome. On the other hand, having said that, I'd have to say that what I've seen right now, which is more of the Metropolitan plan and not the Strategií plan, right? And I've had the chance to read the Strategií plan, and we see a lot of, let's say, micro look at certain aspects which have been through architecture have been deforming Prague, where basically developers look at individual sites and then they build within the current regulations, but the current regulations don't have certain conformity, and this is definitely helping the conformity. But what we're missing a little bit is a certain vision, a certain strategy for the city. So if I would just very simply say, the first option is driven by the problem that the city has certain higher services costs. So because the city has higher services costs, developers are asked to move in. The second one, which is the brownfields and infrastructure, and we saw Bubny. I mean, in that side, there's a train that passes in the middle. So maybe the city has to look at the infrastructure, because changing the infrastructure there could actually move it. So it's not only about saying, okay, we want to build these locations and we're fully in support for it. But I think there needs to be another step going forward. If we look at the fill-ins, so the fill-ins have a lot of regulation issues. You know, you have strict regulations on light here, for instance, what they call the hygiene regulations. Anyway, I could go on and on. I definitely welcome the initiative, and I think there are a lot of good things in what we've seen here. Nevertheless, potentially it has to be a more complex and maybe from my side and putting development aside, it would be good to see what is the city's priorities. You know, what are the city's priorities? We saw a lot of architecture here, a lot of sort of, let's say, telling the developers how you would see them conform in their architecture within the beauty of Prague, which we definitely help. But how is that going to help development as such, as the industry?
Pavel, I mean, I talk to a lot of businesses around this region, and a lot of the time, government and politics comes up as sort of a hindrance. But in this sense, it seems like politics and the government is a real help for you guys. If there's a synergy between the two, it makes your life a lot easier.
No, I would say, you know, we definitely see an effort on the side of the city to, you know, collaborate and find some strategies in this. But I think the biggest challenge we have is really the time frame under which we are working. Because if you look at the processes in Prague, in Czech Republic, I mean, even this master plan has been on and off for a long time, and even the time frame of completion of this was originally 2020, now we're looking at 2022. And this is exactly what Omar said, you know, businesses, like developers, they need to have clear guidance in terms of what's possible, what's not possible. Having Karl here, for example, one of our major projects in Prague, a regeneration of a train station, now designed by Zaha Hadid. And, you know, at the time of the sad events of 9/11 in New York, we have initiated a change of master plan. And by the time we opened the buildings in New York, we got the approval from the city. And there was no big change in the master plan at all. So, I mean, this just shows the bureaucratic process that unfortunately slows down the way things move ahead. And I think that's really where the city, you know, the processes can't take so long. And I think this is where we struggle. And even in the presentation, you know, obviously a lot of effort has been put into it, but we have seen out of the, like, 6 scenarios, there was a question mark on 3. So we see there is no consensus yet. And our worry is, you know, there will be another, obviously discussion needs to take place, but there has to be some strong leadership where the city says, this is what's the plan.
Are these issues that you've heard for the whole of your career? Do you
Of course. And, you know, I think probably in every city, I have rarely heard developers say the city is moving with great efficiency and speed to realize their goals. I'll say sort of fundamentally there are 3 tools that a city can use in implementing its vision and its plan. One, obviously, is land use strategy and land use regulation. A second, which both Omar and Pavel talked about, is the efficiency and response of local government. And the third, which I have to say I didn't entirely understand the goal here in this plan, how a municipality allocates its resources, because I think that really ultimately becomes a major test in how serious a municipality is toward meeting its goals. All municipalities have limited resources. They can't, I don't think any municipality can achieve everything it wants in the time frame it wants to achieve it, and has to make some hard choices about how it allocates its tax dollars. And ultimately that becomes, to me, the standard by which anyone in the public can determine how serious a municipality is toward meeting its goals, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's brownfields, whether it's subsidies to help development in certain areas or whatever. That's an allocation of resources that provides an early signal about how serious a municipality is.
Jaromír, Ivan, I'm keen to bring you guys in here to defend it if you like, though defend is a powerful word. I mean, how much did the concerns of business and the thinking of money come into this when you're planning it?
Well, I think it's all behind the planning which we have. I think we try to push sometimes more than it's obvious in our position to be an institute for the city of Prague, to push politicians and the representatives to really take care of these questions and really to bring them into the discussion and to show them the perspectives which are based on the spendings of city. You know, just for your information, we have great public transport, but we know that it takes 1/3, 1/4 of the annual budget.
Wow.
So then you have, of course, limited resources for other investments. So we know that it has to be somehow balanced, and we see and we believe that we should talk maybe more with all different people, including our leaders, to really show them the concrete or specific numbers and to see that the development of cities is really related to the money and the position of Prague. We are aware of that situation, and I think it is behind, or it must be seen from the plan. Maybe we should work also on that to show it better.
Sure. Pavel, I'm struck in this region that a lot of, I mean, Poland aside, a lot of the other countries, so much of their economy revolves around the city, the capital city. You think of Budapest or even in the Baltics. Do you think Prague recognizes that it's in competition with all those cities and that developers and financiers can go elsewhere if they're not being adequately looked after in maybe their home city?
No, I think we see that the politicians increasingly recognize that there is, in a way, a competition. We see, you know, multinational companies, they look at the region and they are considering, you know, should they move to Budapest, Prague, or Warsaw. I think the historical experience was that all the CEOs liked to sit in Prague, but the drag of the economy moves towards Warsaw. So slowly we see the position that Prague historically had is a little bit losing in the competition with Warsaw. And, you know, our company, we have some developments in Warsaw as well. I must say, from the planning point of view, Warsaw didn't go into the big challenge of changing the master plan for the whole city, but they are looking at particular quarters where maybe that's where you can find a quicker consensus. So we see some parts of the city being already covered by an updated master plan, some parts of the city not being covered where there is a dispute, but it helped them to unlock the areas which are not disputed. And maybe there is an ongoing discussion on areas which might be a little bit of a challenge. Whereas what we see in Prague is, you know, we are trying to have an overall plan, which is great, but at the same time it goes to a detail which will make it very difficult to you know, get it approved within, again, coming back to my original topic in the time frame. So I think in this, when you look at it from the business point of view, I think Prague is a little bit losing through these like long-term processes in competition. For example, what I can compare to is Warsaw.
Omar, we were discussing earlier that there's a lot of ideology in this plan. There's a lot of blue sky thinking in terms of the ethics, if you like, of it, and the feeling. I mean, is that helpful, or is that does it make it more complicated for business because you want details, hard facts?
So first of all, to explain, what I was talking about is the strategic plan, which we weren't really looking at the strategic plan. And I would have to say that I support every single step that you've basically mentioned today, because it's literally, it says, if you go there, this is what we're expecting you to do, this is the height you're expecting to do, and we have less maneuver for controversy and extending the time. So this is step one. Nevertheless, if I look at the strategic plan, which for me is a set of ethical codex. It's an ethical codex as opposed to a strategic plan. It says a lot of things of how things should be right, good, etc. But I'm just thinking of strategy versus urban planning and architecture. So for instance, when we're saying tall buildings, is that because we want to attract a certain type of multinationals? Then I look at the strategic plan, and the strategic plan talks about creativity, about sort of, and for me, the creative businesses are more in business parks, as opposed to skyscrapers, for instance, and how you set the urban setting for what your strategy aspires. So unfortunately for me, it's great that we're trying to write a strategy, but I'd like to understand the strategy a little bit more. Are we mainly the city of culture, and therefore we want the Czechs to live in the city center? And I see, for instance, in this plan, which is the Metropolitan plan, saying a move back to the city center, whilst I look at the strategic plan, and it says decentralization, actually. It says creating community hubs in different parts of Prague for the local people that are living there. Again, I would like to say that it's very good that we're starting. I agree with every single step, because it gives clarity. For a developer, we need the detail more than the big picture, because we want to get our projects going, and we don't want to go through the whole philosophical debate. I appreciate the philosophical debate. It should be taken further, but I'm still seeing a sort of a mismatch.
Karl, I'm keen to ask you about this. I mean, Prague obviously is one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. A lot of people have an idea of it in their head before they even arrive. The same is obviously true of New York in a different way, but there's a certain way the city has developed and the image it's built of itself. Does that make it harder, or does it make it easier when you're trying to plan new things that try to fit in with that ethos? Or would you rather have a blank sheet of paper?
Well, I actually think it makes it easier, because you have a basis and a foundation to build on, and in my view, it makes it much, much easier when you have the both depth of culture here, the history, the architectural quality, and authenticity that makes a good foundation for planning. That said, I think that there's one of the most difficult issues for planners generally is how you mesh the goals of a strategic plan and the desire for predictability on the part of investors and developers and people who live in a city, with the need in a dynamic city for flexibility and the ability to recognize that market forces are going to be changing. Omar talked about the challenge between are we creating skyscrapers for multinational financial services companies or for creative companies like Google, for example, which is a different type of building entirely. And I'm not sure you can entirely say one or the other, as we've seen the world's economy change so dramatically over the past decade or two, and the likelihood that it's going to change even more dramatically in the years to come. So how you balance that flexibility with a degree of certainty is really one of the arts of planning.
There's a lot of nodding from this sofa. I think we've got agreement there. Pavel, is there a not just talking about Penta, but in the market, is there a desire to invest in Prague? Is there a real headstrong sort of willingness to invest here, or are people unsure?
No, it's a lovely city. So I mean, obviously, we want to live here, we want to work here, and we want to have nice projects here. So I think there's definitely interest. But I think what's quite interesting is then from the development market point of view, we have seen a lot of the international developers have actually left the market because they have found it easier elsewhere. So I think this is, if Prague struggles somewhere, it will be again in attracting, let's say, some big names or international developers who could bring some additional know-how to the place, to convince them that it's a place with predictable rules and some planning that is actually supporting the businesses. It's not a hindrance. So I think this will be one of the challenges. But generally, I think still we see a lot of, now with the upswing in the market, we see a lot of new activity. And despite sounding a little bit skeptical, we see a lot of projects happening. And so I think it's still a vibrant city. But I think could have been much more vibrant still.
Would you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, I think, first, there is a lot of investor interest in Prague because of what Prague is, and it is a great quality of life, and no doubt a fantastic quality in life, and we want to get it better, and it's actually improved a lot. But I'd just like to point to Karl, definitely it's not an either or, but what I'm saying is when you're making that decision, what are the guidelines you're basically making those decisions on as a planner? So you're basically saying a set of priorities, and these are the planners, and it goes very much hand in hand with what you guys are doing. And actually for that, then when you're talking to foreign investors, whether they're developers or whether they're multinationals or whether they're just people who want to move here and retire in a beautiful city, they have clarity of what the city is about, So basically, if you're a person saying, well, I want to move to a civilized place, and you're thinking, am I going to go to Berlin, to Munich, to Prague, to Vienna? You can very easily actually say what are the differences between, or Frankfurt or Berlin. You can very easily. And Prague has a fantastic base. It's a beautiful city, and you guys are trying basically to keep that, which is definitely driven. But what I would hope for, and that would be going back to Karl's first point, is that the city would allocate resources to keeping that. So if I want to look at the detail, is have you thought about removing Magistrala? I look at Penta's beautiful project by Zaha Hadid, and it basically, there you have a highway running just edge of it. It's not your fault. But if we're talking about that, then we set certain priorities, and we will agree that we will all work towards those priorities, private and public, maybe sharing costs in certain things, because we're making certain investment anyways, but the public sector has to allocate resources in the same places where they want to see improvement. And basically not just setting regulations for the developer to abide by.
We're being told that we're running out of time, so this will be the last topic that we discuss. But Karl, is there obviously there's more of a resistance in a city like Prague with its history and with the way it looks. Do cities sometimes just have to abandon that and realize that they're going to look different in the future if they want to develop? Or are there ways to maintain it?
Well, there's certainly ways to maintain it. We use techniques of historic preservation, landmarking, districts, special districts, as a means of preserving and protecting the best of our past. And I think that easily can be done in the great cities, and at the same time encouraging growth. And I think if you look at all the great cities in the world, even China is now learning that you can't just destroy your past. And I absolutely think that that's essential, because the past informs the present and informs the future. And every time I talk, and when I talk this afternoon, I'm going to start with the past, because the past really does inform the future.
But we heard from the presentation there's sort of resistance to tall buildings, resistance to changing the please jump in.
No, it's always the question of, which was mentioned here, about the level of flexibility and the level of house in the different levels of planning, in the different, let's say, schemes of delivering the competencies or the governance structure. We all are trying to open the discussion, because we have 57 municipalities. I work here for the city of Prague 3.5 years, and I already have 4th director and the 3rd mayor to work for. Wow. So exactly. This, if I say to somebody on some meetings coming abroad, wow. Yeah. So I'm really thankful for the notes which have been here, because we listened them carefully. and we will try to work with them even more than up to now, and we would like to cooperate with everybody who is really keen on to improve the environment of Prague, because that's what we all try to do.
That's a wonderful summary that I probably couldn't have even done myself. I've got a big stop sign here. We're going to have to kill it. Really, gentlemen, thank you very much for all of your thoughts, and let's hopefully continue this conversation between everybody here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
If I may indulge the audience for just one question, I think, well, from our perspective, I think there's two things that were brought to the table, and one really wasn't, but I think it's been discussed over the last few days and months. The leadership aspect is hugely important, and it's missing, I think, and that's a big. You need someone to sort of carry the torch for how you're going to attract people into the city and how the development community can operate. To do, again, the things that we like to do, which is public space investment and public infrastructure investment. But the other aspect I think that's missing is participation, which IPR is working a lot on, which they didn't really address in this plan, because that's not the purpose of the plan, but participation in the process. And that's like, if we can, I'm sure there's lots of questions, but because of the time, let's just get one question from the audience. So who's brave enough to ask a question of one of the panelists? Okay. We have microphones. Here, in the front.
There we go, we've got lights.
Okay.
Oh, look, there's
Hello.
loads of you.
So I have a question for Mr. Haincem and Mr. Duškov, so I will ask in Czech and then I will try to ask in English. Já se chci zeptat na zástavbu těch bývalých nákladových nádraží, jestli se uvažuje s nějakým návratem železniční dopravy někdy do Prahy a jestli teda tímhletím nezavíráte možnost zástavby na nákladových nádražích, teda možnost toho využití pro železniční dopravu. So I'm asking for development in railway station, if there will be some problem if we want load railway transportation to come back in Prague.
Great question.
Okay, is it okay to answer in English for you?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
We count with that. In last years, the share of let's say, peri-urban transportation by train is increasing in numbers. It's the only a place where we can really increase our share for public transport, so we do support that. And the development of the brownfields doesn't really destroy or doesn't cancel the opportunity to use the existing stations, but we don't need such a space. The same counts for Masarykovo nádraží, that we know that 6 platforms will be enough. Also for the new railway connection to the airport. So that's one level, that for the local transportation. What we know in Prague is that because Warsaw is also competing with us, that we would need more connections also towards the metropolis in the Central Europe. You know, it's not really easy to get. You are faster in London than in Salzburg or Lodz.
Yeah,
so
that definitely is a nightmare traveling around this part of the world.
So we know that we have
by train, seriously.
So we have to find the resources to invest into and improve our public infrastructure, especially in terms of railway traffic, to interconnect the parts of the city and to bring, let's say, far away traffic and the local traffic to one places. And then maybe last thing, we also try to somehow work with the national companies responsible for transportation, which is not always easy, but it's like everywhere else. Plus, we try to involve people from Central Bohemian region to really use the transport by train to allocate the park and rides in the Central Bohemia, so then we can really, this daily commuting also be done or shared by transport by train.
Actually, just on that point, I'm going to keep you from your coffee for 2 minutes. I'm interested to hear what you guys think about that. I mean, in London, King's Cross has just been redone, and it's turned that whole region into Google's there, the Guardian's there. I think New York's doing the same with Grand Central at the moment. Does investing in a project that involves infrastructure and government and local authority put you off or make you want to join in somewhere like Central Europe? I mean, if someone says, look, build this brand new office block, it's going to be beautiful, but by the way, there's going to be the train station underneath, you're going to have to deal with the local authorities, does that make you think, well, wait a second?
Well, infrastructure is key. It's the driver of development. Actually, we had a great guy called Nigel Atkins speak about London development and Paris development not long ago, organized by the Association of Developers, and basically it showed to which extent, like King's Cross, which extent infrastructure is the key driver. And actually understanding the infrastructure development of Prague and the vision of the infrastructure development of Prague would actually answer your question and actually give a lot of guidance for all the developers what uses should be where and how. And there's a clear plan on the delivery of these infrastructures. Because one thing is to say, we will have a ring road in Prague. And the other thing is to wait for the ring road 40 years, you know? And basically, so these two things should go hand in hand. But infrastructure is the key driver. I mean, look at Singapore, look at Dubai, look at all the cities that have been flourishing.
I would just say that increasingly, at least in the United States and perhaps in Europe as well, maybe less so in Asia, these major infrastructure projects, to your point, are increasingly public-private ventures where private development and government, local government, have to work together. And that is extremely complicated. And it really does require, A, mutual trust between government and the private sector, not always there, but really is essential. B, a sophistication on the part of each party as to what government is responsible for, what the private sector is responsible for, and C, a great deal of patience and close coordination. It is extremely complicated, but I think increasingly we're going to see major infrastructure projects almost required to be that model.
Pavel, do we have those things here as final point?
I'm afraid, Pavel, just two words, and then we're going to break for coffee, and then Mimi Huang's going to come back after.
I would just say we are in it. This Masaryk train station, that's exactly a collaboration, public-private. So, I mean, if you look at the opportunities in the city, it's mostly around these areas. You know, it's a lot of people traffic. It's typically in the city center or close to the city center. And so from this point of view, it's a logical place to look at, and generally, it's worth the effort, or we hope so, at least.
Thank you.
But we do have a big trust deficiency, which we're trying to work on right now.
We're going to work on that over coffee.
We're going to work on that over coffee. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's awesome.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot.